All right, what's up, everybody? We have our old buddy, Father Deacon Dr. Ananias, with us again today, and we're going to hit a plethora of topics. We want to get to some philosophy. We want to talk about epistemology and tag. I want to talk a little bit about the Western Rite, Augustinian Latin theology, the developments of Latin theology. We want to talk about some of the arguments that came up last night. Is it a question of who has more liberals amongst their respective groups, Orthodox versus Roman Catholics? We want to talk about issues like Fatima and the Rosary, mysticism, all these kinds of topics with Father Deacon Dr. Ananias, and some practical wisdom and advice on how to go about navigating this domain. So, how are you, Father Deacon?
Good. Thanks for having me. This is good topics. Christ is risen, everybody.
Indeed, he is. Also, yeah, we want to talk about Montanica too.
Yeah. Do you want me to give a shout out right now in Montanica or later?
Maybe actually the beginning and the end might be good. So tell us what that is and when that is and how people can get tickets.
So let's see here. If I go on, I'm going to put it in the chat. If I can find it. It's the problem having ADD. I have 40 different tabs open.
Yeah, me too. Like that. I do.
But let's go to your stream. Anyways, Orthodox Montanica. This is going to be the 4th year. Some of you might remember that Jay and I and others actually started that 4 years ago, and that's when we had it in Helena. It was small, but it was fun. It was still in a kind of nascent state. And that's really was kind of announcing the patristic faith ministry that we're going to kind of collab that we were doing. And it continually matured and got better and better. It got the formal blessing. Bishop Maxim about a year and a half ago, who was a guest speaker as well. And it's under his Amphoron, and more priests have gotten involved, and it's just great. So each topic's different each year. We had the addition of having a men's retreat last year. It looks like we're going to be switching that out and doing a women's retreat later this year, so we kind of alternate. But Orthodox Montanica is not only a conference, it's where you learn about important Orthodox topics from some of the best Orthodox speakers and clergy members. It's an entire immersive, interactive experience that's almost like a retreat, and people walk away and their lives are changed. We believe that in Montana, this provides a kind of template that one can take back to their own cities and states and bring it to their own Orthodox communities. And again, lives are changed. We have 3 people getting 3 different success cases of marriages. So for all you single people out there looking for a good Orthodox spouse, we definitely encourage you to come. This year's topic is the theology of the icon. And everybody's going to be doing various different topics. We have Orthodox film directors coming. One famous Orthodox film director, a former student of Dr. David Bradshaw, but now has gone into, I think he still teaches philosophy as well, but he's gone into film. He's got some big film deals, I think, with Lionsgate, Netflix series, I believe. It's on the thing. But he's known for becoming truly human. We have our dear friend Shane Swenson, who is our iconographer, who's restoring the temple right now, who's going to talk about some of the practicalities. And he's going to give live demonstrations and how one actually paints iconography. the history of it. So that's really good. I'm going to be giving a talk. Of course, I love Vladimir Lossky, and I'm going to take a deep dive into image and likeness and what that means too. We have Father Andrew Moore and many more, and perhaps some special guests. So please sign up.
For those interested, by the way, I included a link there to Pageau's interview with Dr. Nathan Jacobs there.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. And what else should I say about great food? It's a heck of a deal. I know Montana can be hard for people to get to, and sometimes the price of tickets of flights are a bit more than what people want to pay. So I've worked some great hotel deals to bring down costs, like 2/3 off the normal cost. You get 6 meals provided for you, entertainment. We have a live band, a live bluegrass band this year, a professional band. We have excellent wine and a local brewery keg being provided. So for $170, you get, and we also have free camping too. If people want to go budget by camping, boondocking at one of the parishioners' ranches. So we encourage everybody to come, especially if you're single and looking for a good Orthodox spouse. But everybody's welcome, all family, even if you're not Orthodox.
I actually know, I think we have a couple female friends that we know that are going there who are single. So, I'm sorry, what is dry camping? I'm just curious. I've never heard of this. What does that mean?
Hey, don't worry about it. You'll find out.
I know.
What is? No facilities. So it's like if you took your tent out, so it's not bathrooms and showers and stuff like that. There may be bathrooms, I can't remember, but there's not showers and stuff like that. So you need to bring your own toiletries, toilet paper. Probably should bring some bear spray. The bears are out. Now, what I find really good, what the bears hate, if you have any bacon grease, what you want to do is you just want to lather up your tent and body. Get a bunch of that trash and litter that around. It really keeps the bears away.
Awesome. Anything else you want to say about that?
No, I'd say we're looking forward to seeing you. Everybody's welcome. We've got some great sponsors and vendors this year that is going to be providing some carvings and various other stuff to.
Yeah, shout out to Shane. I've known Shane for a long time. I think we started talking in 2017. We had a lot of phone conversations over the years, so glad that you got him to come be there with you. He's a good dude.
Yeah, we love. He's been staying and working on the iconography currently right now, and so he'll be with us through the conference as well. The conference is the week after Pentecost because that's a feasting week. The canons forbid you from fasting during feast days and feast weeks, and so it's a celebratory time. It's a time to form lifelong wonderful, beautiful relationships, potential like I said, marriages, and just to grow in the faith and then take that back into your community. The Holy Spirit and his love and orthodoxy should be contagious in that way. And so that's really what we do. We're up here trying to change lives. That's what's going on. So thank you for the shout out. We'll remind people again on that.
All right, so do you want to start by talking about the more philosophical epistemic issues, or do you want to go into the more theological issues? What would you like to start with?
Let's see what people in the chat want. Do you want to just go full blown into what I'm going to need you to do? We're going to crash course through modal logic, S5 logic, higher second order logic, the philosophy of mathematics, and no, I'm kidding, mathematical logic.
You had written a paper pretty recently. I think we talked about that.
The reason for reason.
Yeah, given your reason for reason. And then there have been some responses. I think you had some people saying, let's deal with some of those criticisms first. Maybe we hear this
Okay.
we hear this response. For example, oh, you guys are coherentists because you must be. And so if you say anything about epistemic holism, you must be part of this
Jay,
coherentist
one
philosophy.
second.
Sure,
I want to take this phone call. Really, it's really important.
no problem. So some of the
Thank
other
you.
critiques I'll
Last
mention.
Mysticism.
Some of the other critiques I'll mention that we've had of tag is, well, there kind of are self-evident things, and the self-evident things that are the ones that just simply don't require justification. They just are the case. So I think Father Deacon will get into that, which I think is really especially when this comes from kind of the Thomistic sphere of things. It's really a way to just sort of hand wave the questions and the issues and pretend like, well, there's not really a problem because I just don't accept that the challenge to self-evidence is a real challenge. Things just are self-evident. But it's really, again, missing the point, begging the question, and just sort of ignoring the big picture and trying to come up with a new way to redefine terms such that something self-evident or axiomatic, by definition, doesn't require justification. Okay, but why should we think that? You see, so it's just a constant sort of game with a lot of these people of moving the problem back a step, pretending like these aren't issues. We got a couple super chats. I'll go ahead and read those. Sincere Hypocrite, $5. Is it coherent for a? Or we already had that question last night. Scott B. Do you have any opinions about von Balthasar, who wrote Cosmic Liturgy, the Universe According to Maximus the Confessor? He argues that Maximus was basically a Petrine papist. Yeah, obviously I would disagree with that reading of Maximus. That's very popular amongst, especially Roman Catholics at the time of Vatican II, who wanted to do this sort of ressourcement where you go back and sort of breathe life into the church through the Eastern lung. This was a very popular move that was going on at the time of Vatican II, and von Balthasar was one of the key people to try to bring about that resurgence of Eastern theology at the time. So with von Balthasar, you have, I think, several problems, but also several things going on. So at one level, he wants to re-Easternize the Latin Church for whatever reason, probably ultimately for ecumenist reasons. So he's relevant in terms of if you're into Maximus scholarship. But I think if you get into to Maximus himself, clearly he's not a proto-Thomist. Maximus talks about the energies. He talks about them being multiple. He talks about them being the things around God, the things around the essence. There's a real distinction between the essence and energy, so to speak, to use that terminology. So there's really nothing.
Sorry, how did this topic come up?
So I'm reading the super chats until you come back.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So basically the question is, what should we think of von Balthasar's book on Maximus? So I think it's okay to read it if you have a grounding in the Orthodox reading of Maximus, which is that he's not a papist and he's not a Thomist, a proto-Thomist. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, sorry about the phone call. That was the director of Man of God, so I wanted to talk to her real quick. So forgive me, everybody.
So we're talking about, we'll go back to the tag questions. So we had some critiques of coherence. You must be a coherentist. What's wrong with saying things are just self-evident because they are by definition?
Yeah, so should I say? So again, we can look at why would Orthodox even read and do philosophy when St. Paul warns of philosophy, beware of vain philosophy built on the traditions of men. Don't we have everything we need within Orthodoxy? Again, it can be useful to read the great books. We talked about this earlier in my stream. And to be able to identify when philosophers say correct things or bring up correct points. Oftentimes, there's questions that are raised that are good questions. For example, Jay and I will use David Hume. That doesn't make us Humeans. We might read something in Quine his epistemic holism. We might read something in
Plato or Aristotle.
Plato or Aristotle. We might read something from Thomas Kuhn's Scientific Revolutions and say that's a good point. It should be addressed. That doesn't make us coherentists. We may even find that foundationalism had, and it does have some good questions about inference and orthodox tag in the papers that I presented. People want to box you in. Well, that's you're a coherentism. See, that's the problem. And I've solved the problem on coherentism. Or you believe basically coherentism has a legitimate point. What could be reasons to hold other beliefs other than reasons and other beliefs? And so justifications lies in the kind of network and inferential, right, relationship between beliefs, cognitive states, propositions, etc. That is a good criticism of foundationalism. Correct? There's good critiques. That doesn't make you a coherentist. Okay.
One of the classic critiques of coherentism is that it's another form of foundationalism. It just basically says all beliefs are foundational.
Yeah. I find that the question of Chisholm's problem of criterion is an excellent, and I have a more kind of complicated, and I'll put this in here. I found a great paper. I'm going to put it in the chat because this guy's basically arguing, it's a little bit more advanced. But if you sign up for Jay Dyer's chalk.com, you can actually cognitively enhance through neurotropics and allow yourself to actually be able to read this article. But this is Luciano Floridi. And his article, The Problem of Justification of a Theory of Knowledge. This guy is arguing our exact case. And one of the things he talks about is what's really cool is that Chisholm's problem of criterion actually goes back to both Montaigne and Sextus Empiricus, and issues that they brought up in the, I think Sextus, it's called the Dalius. And they're wider kind of epistemic questions. We always say about like kind of meta epistemic.
Did you put the link in there? I don't see it. I want that paper.
Sorry.
That's fine.
Distracted. Let me put it right here. Okay, so does knowledge exist? A lot of this was right? There's a sort of kind of skepticism. I mean, how do we even know that? How would we establish that? And what are kind of justifications? And what this shows, it points out, and it gets into this kind of dialectical tension that I point out in my papers, and the inability to kind of resolve or overcome these skeptical issues. Now, I've had people say, well, and there are responses to Chisholm's criteria problem. Let's see real quick if I can put something up. So one of the things, so there's two issues. What constitutes as knowledge, correct? Let me just put this up real quick. Forgive me. Open. I'd rather just read what I've written, just makes it a little bit easier. Let's see, epistemology. I write down all my thoughts so I don't have to rely on my memory, which is another interesting issue that I've brought up in epistemology.
You want me to read a super chat while you're doing that?
Yes, could you?
Yeah, so Dash says for $5, Jay, I'm interested to get into church history. What are 10 books that you would recommend in order to learn it? Also, what are the books that I would need for orthodoxy? Well, I would say there's a lot of different ones. You can go to my reading list at the website and pick some of those. But off the top of my head, I would say, Yaroslav Pelikan's 5-volume set kind of covers a lot of church history. It's kind of a classic, used in a lot of seminaries. You could read John Meyendorf's book, The Orthodox Church. You could read, Mystical Theology of the Orthodox Church by Losky. Vision of God by Losky is great. You could get the Papadakis Meyendorf book. Christian East and the Rise of the Papacy is a good medieval Byzantine era book. Those are some places to start, and it'll take you a while to get through some of those. So, Eugenia, $5. Thank you so much, Eugenia. Dave the Philippian, $10. Thank you, Father Deacon and Jay. Thank you, Dave. Appreciate that. Okay, well, back to Father Deacon. Did you find what you're looking for?
Yeah. So, if I read this real quick, so problem criterion: what are you justified in believing? Like, what's the extent of our justified beliefs or knowledge? Is the first one question, and then what makes our beliefs justified? In other words, what is the criteria? And as Chisholm points out, and this goes back to Sextus Empiricus, and even Montaigne himself has this kind of dialectical tension. You can't answer the first one unless you already have an answer to the second, and you can't answer the second unless you already have an answer to the first. Now, I was inspired by this, but I go deeper, and I think that even the paper that I pointed out and posted from Academia kind of hints at this too. But let me just say that one of the ways is, well, we just assume that something is. One of the responses is called particularism. You start. I think Ernest Sosa has something about this. One of the problems is you assume that we have knowledge, that these count, and then you could come to be like, well, why? Let's investigate after that. What makes it? What are good reasons? What would a criteria be? But the problem is, I think, with all of this, and it certainly doesn't answer the skeptic's needs, it just assumes exactly what we want to prove. And I don't think that Chisholm's issue goes far enough. I want to put, can autonomous man, what do I mean by autonomous man? Autonomous epistemology. Autonomous epistemology, as both Russ Mannion and I define it, is that, let's see, one second, I'll just quote myself. Let's see. By autonomous epistemology, I mean any attempt to construct a philosophical account of the world on the assumption that it's possible that God doesn't exist, or that it's possible for man to possess knowledge and give a coherent. So there's one, that's the first order. Like, do we even have knowledge? That's why I'm taking the Chisholm problem a little bit further. Like, do we even have it? And the second one, how would you establish that? How would you give a coherent account that knowledge exists? That would be a second order. Independent or autonomously from the existence and revelation of God. Now, that obviously doesn't just include the atheists. That would include all of natural theology and Aquinas, correct?
Why? Yeah, and you're saying giving an account for that knowledge, not just does everyone know things, but how do they account for that knowledge?
Yeah, there's two issues. There's a skeptical issue. Does knowledge even exist? And which leads you into the second issue. How would we establish that independent of God's revelation? And what is autonomous epistemology or any of the philosophical projects? They assume exactly what I'm proving. Well, we just assume that knowledge does. Just grant me all my assumptions and then I can make my case. Without God, So I believe that Aquinas himself and Descartes and all these other people who did believe were Christians and believed in God, but they didn't put their first things first, correct? They actually, if you ask them, okay, but you're giving me deductions, right? You're telling me certain stuff about the world, you're assuming knowledge, and it may not be that God exists. That's why it's like, well, the atheist and the theist can have this common ground, right? We just use deductions and logic and our sense faculties, and we just make all these assumptions. Hey, maybe God exists, maybe he doesn't. It's something we'll find out at the end of all these deductive arguments. Oh, now we find out you're a Thomist, and you say, see, now we found out that God does exist.
With reasonable certitude, not with certitude.
Yeah. Well, wait a minute, but you started all argumentation with the possibility he might not. Right? That it's something that has to be proved. Proved according to what? This man-made unjustified system that I built. That is autonomous epistemology.
And real quick, just for the reminder to the audience, could you also remind everybody what Chisholm's criterion problem is real quick?
Yeah, let me just state it once again. Chisholm's problem is there's a dialectical tension between number one and number two. Number one, what's the extent of your justified beliefs? In other words, what counts as knowledge? Two, what are you justified in believing? In other words, what's the criterion for justification or knowledge? I can't answer one, what am I justified in believing, without actually telling you what the criteria is that I'm right of justification. And I can't answer the criteria of justification number two without saying what I'm justified in believing. Okay, so there's been several proposals of how to get around this, none of which I believe are satisfactory. One of them is called particularism. I'm just going to pop up something real quick. And it doesn't satisfy the skeptics' questions. And that's why we can use David Hume, Sextus Empiricus, and all these things. They're great questions. And I'm just trying to pop up.
And a lot of people think, including a professor who came to one of the conferences, right? They think that you and I are skeptics because we use these arguments, if you remember that.
Yes, that's a great point. Let's see.
No, we are not. The point is that we need refutations of skepticism, and this type of argumentation actually does that. So we're not skeptics by utilizing arguments that Hume or any of these people make. The point is that their paradigms can't give an account for and answer the questions of Hume. Doesn't mean that Hume's right about his entire worldview.
Let me just see here real quick. Anyway, so I had some individuals saying that they solved. First of all, my argument's not dependent on. It sounds similar. It's kind of inspired this kind of dialectical tension. My argument's not dependent upon Chisholm. So you could answer, even if I granted, well, I solved Chisholm's problem of criterion. See, and there's been lots of responses. First, we're going to have to actually find out, is that true? Did you? I mean, you're asserting something. I haven't been convinced by that. But even if they did, my question's a deeper question. Does knowledge exist? And how would you give an account for that? How would you actually support that? Now, so one response is, well, you see what the problem is. You have a first order question. Does knowledge exist? That's constitutive of me knowing that knowledge exists or making statements. Now, we can generally agree, yeah, it's possible that I can know something, first order, without being justified in making statements that I know, or I have knowledge, or giving an account of it. Right? Why? Because two depends on one and not the other way around. Does that make sense? Number one, knowledge is constituted of second order knowledge claims, not vice versa. And so they say, well, the problem is you're just, what did I point out in my paper? Oh, but the problem is you're always stuck in the number two box. You're always making second order claims about the first order claims. And number two can't be true unless one is, but I can never get to one because I'm always stuck in number two, and therefore I'm epistemic bootstrapping. Now, I had some individuals write me, and there was somebody in a stream. Well, that's only a problem because you're trying to make an inference from one to two. But you see, in this fever dream that I had and made up philosophy in my head, my philosophy doesn't need inferences. And you classically see this all the time with philosophy in debates. You saw this with me having the civil kind of discussion debate with Amdir. Oh, wow, Father Deacon's going to get me on this issue of justification. So what do if you're a philosopher? Well, you just minus out any problems out of your system, right? Well, in my system, I don't need justification, see? In my system, we don't rely on inference. If inference is giving the problem in my story, made up story, then I just minus it out of my fictional story about the world. And so I just have this direct acquaintance. I just know. And so I don't need to justify and get a second order because I don't need inferences. The justification itself is in the first order experience in a kind of immediacy. And there I've solved the problem. I've gotten around your objections, Father Deacon. But have you? Great story. How do I know it's true? And I can't get people to see this. Well, if it's true, I don't have to explain how it's true because that's an inference. Doesn't it seem kind of like sorcery? Oh, I'll set it up so that he can't ask those questions. I stacked the cards. I minused it out, right? We have this all the time when people come on to Twitter spaces. We're not asking you to tell us a story. You get all these people come in, right? Well, actually, Jay, there were these alien race called the Palladians, and they're an ancient race from the planet Xeon, and that actually they came down and they in their time machines and they fabricated the Bible, right? But then the Christian church, tried to silence this group and the true believers called the Gnostic, right? And they spin this whole story, right? That's a great story. How do we know it's true? Well, I'm trying to cut through all the complicated stuff, and what you're going to find is all of it's always going to boil down, well, if my story is true, then it's true. And that would be the justification. So this was kind of a recent response. And for some reason, I think academics and Thomists particularly scholastics have this problem. They give too much credit to academia, philosophers, and I've got to answer on this, or well, I got to play this game, right? This arbitrary game that's set up, and they're so focused, and this can easily happen. It happened to me in grad school too. They set the academia intelligentsia sets the rules. And so it's, I have to answer the way they told me, and I have to do this with the bonjour says this, and so I have to say this, and you're getting distracted. Oh, but that's not actually how it works in logic. You're getting distracted. Because we're asking a metalogical, meta-epistemological question. As I put in my paper, you are missing the epistemological forest for the epistemic trees. You're down in the details. And you're missing the larger question. How do I know that that's true? How do I know that knowledge? And can you pull? What I'm trying to show is that it will always, as Russ Manny points, any attempt apart from the revelation of God and saying that it's impossible. We're not saying it's possible that God doesn't exist. It's impossible to have knowledge or give any coherent account unless we assume that God's the necessary starting point and through his revelation, right? This is basically what I'm arguing. So there is no autonomous story building projects that can ever accomplish that. And so any account that tries to do that, that thinks, well, I think I can actually make a philosophical story and create justifications that knowledge exists and give an account for those justifications, will end up, as Rasmussen is saying, always be viciously circular, arbitrary, or incoherent. And therefore we can rule it out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and for those that are curious in the chat, I did link your paper from academia.edu that is part of why this discussion is happening here, your reason for reason.
I think part of it too is we download bad operating systems. We get our way, because what's the beginning quote where I quote myself from the paper? The hardest problem is convincing people the problem is not hard at all, but simple. It's really, really simple. That's what I'm trying to get it down to. But how do I know? Oh, great. If it turns out that we have direct acquaintance and we don't need inference to justify, and that we have this internalism means I have immediate access to the reasons for that. Great. That would solve a lot of these problems. I just want to know.
But how do we know that that is the case, right?
And I can't get these people to see this.
Yeah, it's like they just keep saying, well, because here's my position. Well, here's this position.
Yes.
Okay, but why and how do we think and know that that's the case? It's very simple.
And they'll say, well, the only reason why it's a problem is because you subscribe to the... First of all, you don't even know what I ascribe to epistemically. I never stated it. I didn't...
This is a typical thing Thomists do, where if you just do some tweaking and redefining of the terms, oh, well, there's not a problem anymore because I've redefined the words to mean this.
Yeah. And so it is a type of ad hoc, right? That I'm creating something in order to get out of problems. Isn't that what an ad hoc?
Yeah, I mean, that's what philosophy is. Philosophy is a lot of, car salesmanship, right? Of talking your way out of stuff. And well, let me just let's redefine it and use this. It's like lawyers, the way lawyers redefine terms. Well, there's not a problem if we say it's this.
Oh, this is crazy. God's calling me right now. God says there's no reason to question FDA. Everything in his reason for reason. Oh, he's texting me now. Is correct. So there you go. See how I built in my own ad hoc into this stream right now? That makes it.
Thomism is very similar to Marxism in the aspect of unfalsifiability, right? If there's a problem or a challenge to the system, you just need to redefine and tweak the terms, and the system then becomes again unfalsifiable, much like the papacy, right?
Yeah.
And isn't that what these people are doing at a psychological level? It's like, I could just redefine stuff to make the problem go away.
Yeah, that's exactly. And all of philosophy is kind of like that.
Exactly.
Well, I just give a better explanation that does. So you bring up objections. I assume they're good objections. And then I go, okay, well, I need to come up with a different story, you see. How would I begin to answer that? Okay, well, if I add this, what if I make the distinction that, well, it's not inferential, it's or it's not in re, it's in virtue, it's that sounds really good. Then they wouldn't be able to, just because you can answer like you get out of, hey, look, it's a better story. At best, that's what we can say. It's a better story. Your story doesn't have the same problems. It doesn't tell me that it's not true. And in fact, what did we learn from the Quine-Duhem underdetermination of data thesis is theoretically it's possible to create multiple better stories systems, correct? Now you've got, let's say you got 5 stories or 5 paradigms.
Yeah, if all the paradigms can equally describe the data, right? That's what this problem is. Then more and more data doesn't tell us which of the paradigms is correct.
So I would say, like, sure, it's a better. I dealt with this in the philosophy of science class. Well, certainly there are better scientific stories, right? Ones that don't have the problems with the anomalies, that give a kind of parsimony, simplicity in the explanation, stuff like that, and various other things that we could talk about that previous problems, previous paradigms or scientific paradigms didn't have. Okay. And what you see is this happens in science, right? This kind of ad hoc modification where it's like, okay, well, add this into the story. Now, suppose I've got now 5 different people with 5 different stories, and they're all better than the previous 30 stories. They all answer the problems that the 30 other stories had, that people critiqued. Where does that lead me? It doesn't tell me any of them are true. At best, it just tells me, well, they're better stories. But again, it misses a more fundamental question of criteria and justification, higher order. Why ought I, in a normative issue, why ought I to think they're better stories? Why ought I think that you should avoid anomalies? There's all these assumptions that when you talk to philosophers and the critics come in, they just assume, and they don't ask these kind of more fundamental, well, I don't have to justify, and they go back to, well, if my story's true, then I don't have to justify it. See, because the justification is I built it into the.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, you built in these fail safes, which again just sort of like redefine the problems or something. It's like getting caught in a loop of where you're supposed to go to the app that tells you to contact the AI on the app for whatever your problem is, and then the app tells you to contact an agent, and they give you a phone number, and when you call the phone number, it gives you a link to the AI to talk to the AI chat agent. So I got caught in this loop last week trying to solve one of these problems with a tech issue. And literally I'm like, back and forth between the app telling me to go to the agent, but the agent link is an app to the AI. So it's like back and forth, back and forth.
It reminds me of the South Park. My friend, have I answered your... And remember, he gets stuck in this loop, but it's like they were taking all of what you're saying, but they were mixing in the story about Inception, because it ends up... It's actually a pretty cool episode. And they don't know whose dream that they're actually in, and they can't break out of this kind of loop that they're...
Well, that's how Through the Looking Glass ends, is they have a debate at the end over whose dream they're in between Alice and the other characters.
Yeah, great story, Jay.
No, I mean it relates to what we're talking about, because word games actually plays into this, because a lot of I think we'd mentioned recently the Tortoise and Achilles, which is the story at the end of, it's like a philosophical logical problem that he raises, Carol, at the end of Through the Looking Glass, which plays into your point of second order, higher order thinking, because it does one logical proposition entail an infinite set of propositions, and ultimately it speaks to kind of Gödel's incompleteness theorem that sets are never comprehensive. They always end up kind of having some assumption of an axiom outside of the set. So that's an analogy to the type of argument that tag is. It doesn't mean that Gödel's incompleteness theorem is a tag argument.
So let me just summarize this, because I want to give a thank you to that. You introduced me to that, because again, a lot of this stuff inspires me. There's a sort of kind of similarity, gets me thinking about something in a particular way. And then obviously the work that I'm doing and whatever I'm particularly involved in, I'll see an insight. I think a lot of kind of scientific and philosophical discoveries are like that. It's, oh, whoa, that applies to something that I'm doing. And I think that you realize that too. And that's why you sent me Through the Looking Glass. And what Lewis Carroll is, obviously he's a logician, but he's interested in wordplay and stuff like this too. And what he presents is a kind of skeptical argument concerning deductive arguments. Now, a valid deductive argument is one in which the premises necessarily imply the truth of the conclusion. In other words, if the premises are true, it's impossible for the conclusion to be false. Therefore, in order to assent to the conclusion of a valid argument, that P and P implies Q, that's basically what we're saying. The premise and the premise implies Q, the conclusion. One must assent to a premise that states that exact fact, that the premises imply the conclusions. So now we have another conditional added to that. In order for deductions to be true, I have to have a premise that states the premises imply the conclusion. Are you following me with this?
Yeah, it's just raising the bar because it assumes one said about the statement itself.
Yeah.
It entails a proposition about the first statement that I have to assume that P implies Q, or entails Q, excuse me, right?
Yes, in other words, in any premise of a deductive argument, if we're going to assent to that, the implication, then we're merely adding another premise and a longer conditional that we must assent to.
Yes.
So what's interesting about this and what Jay found is that there's a sort of kind of meta level thinking at this that relates to what I'm doing. I'll show you how I use this argument to then create my own argument. Anyways, but if I add a premise stating that premises imply a conclusion, i.e. the truth of valid deduction, then I have an additional premise creating even a longer conditional that you have to assent to if you're going to assent to any valid deductive argument.
People are saying this is word salad. It's not word salad. It's a very famous logical sort of a paradox that Lewis Carroll proposed.
Why is it always with the word salad? Like, if somebody doesn't understand something, it's word salad.
Anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. You're doing good. Proceed here. So yeah, so basically you just keep stacking on the additional inferences about the propositions themselves.
Hey, bud, I'll be the judge of what's word salad or not. How about that? Professor of words and logic will be, okay? All right. So what we're doing is we're simply adding more premises or statements about the previous premise, about what deductive arguments actually are. So a deductive argument, a premise cannot imply the conclusion unless we can't assent to that unless we assent to the premise about that, the premise about that, so on ad infinitum. So in order to assent to the conclusion of any single argument, one must assent to an infinite number of propositions. You cannot do that. You cannot assent to an infinite number of propositions, and therefore you can't assent to the conclusion of any argument. Okay, that is Lewis Carroll's argument. Did I present that fairly?
Yes, and also for those that are unclear or new to this or what, this is actually the subject of Hofstadter's famous Pulitzer-winning book, Gödel, Escher, Bach. So this is a well-known thing. It's not a made-up thing.
Okay, so then I thought about this and about knowledge in general. Because what's one of my questions? I don't know if knowledge exists and how we'd be able to have reasons, proofs, or arguments that our knowledge exists. How do we know it? Okay, so suppose I have P. Now I'm going to take Lewis Carroll's argument. I'm going to make it even more general. It's not about just deductions. It's about knowledge in general. I'm going to put this into an implication premise because that's what he's doing. Like I noticed there's implications in here. So, okay, bear with me. P stands for knowledge exists. Q stands for the proposition or statement knowledge exists. Does everybody follow me? There's a different, that's the first order, second order. There's two different issues going on. In reality, whether knowledge exists, and our statements about knowledge existing. Does that make sense? So knowledge exists, and then I have a statement, knowledge exists. Typically in philosophy, we put statements or propositions in quotation marks to separate the first and second order to make it clear, okay, so the tree is green is the reality is different than the statement, the tree is green. Everybody follow me on that?
Yes.
Okay. So the first order, knowledge exists, that'll be P. The statement, knowledge exists, is Q. Premise one, if it is true that knowledge exists, this has been my whole argument in Reason for Reason. If it is true that knowledge exists, then the proposition knowledge exists is true. Formally, that's just P implies Q. Premise two, if P implies Q, then that, i.e. P implies Q, implies the proposition P implies Q. However, if that reality of P implies Q implies that proposition, let's call it R, then R implies the proposition, the entire thing. If P implies Q implies the proposition P implies Q. Do you see how I'm adding more conditionals on that? Let's call that S. So bear with me. What we have now is if P implies Q, then P implies Q implies R. And if that all happens, then that implies S. And if that is true, then I have another conditional about the whole statement about that. Let's call it T. So on and so on ad infinitum. So my premise 5 is if P implies Q implies R and S and T and so on ad infinitum. And since we are finite, we cannot affirm an infinite amount of propositions. We cannot affirm P implies Q. Let's go back. What was P implies Q? If knowledge exists, then the proposition is true that knowledge exists. Therefore, we can never actually affirm that knowledge exists. Do you see what I did there? Autonomous man in his finitude cannot affirm knowledge exists. And I was thinking through this. Why did all these different things, whether it's the second, first order kind of issue, whether it's the putting your epistemological horse before your epistemological cart before your metaphysical horse, all these kind of dialectical tensions that involve you in kind of unjustified circularity. There's many different reasons why that could actually happen, but I think that it's not simply just because of the fallenness of man that makes it even worse. I don't think Adam and Eve pre-fall would have been able to solve this, right? On their own, apart from God. I think that, again, it's a separation, and maybe, Jay, that's what you were talking about in another stream. It's the fall is a kind of separation from God. But because man is finite and he's separated from God, he doesn't have God. It's his all in all. His epistemic, his ontological first set point. Then all these problems arise. Everything's broken. And he can't accomplish what he sets out to be. In this case, what I've argued, being inspired by Lewis Carroll's argument, is you can't even affirm that knowledge exists. Because in order to do that, you'd be, as Lewis Carroll pointed out with another argument, having to assent to longer and longer conditionals, actually ad infinitum, and he can never do that. So you can never even get to assent that knowledge exists. That's my argument that I actually came up with.
Isn't there a way to draw this too? I'm looking at a couple diagrams where they're drawing out like P, Q follows from P, and then 2 is the statement about Q follows from P, and then the next statement is the statement about Q follows from P. Like, there's a way you could probably draw this out to where maybe the audience would have. I find that visual stuff usually helps this kind of thing before. So there's the statement, P implies Q, or P entails Q, and then there's the statement about P entails Q, and then there's the statement about the statement about P entails Q, and the statement about the statement about the statement about, right? That's what we're doing here. That's what the chat seems to be having a hard time understanding. There's a guy already got booted saying that literally this is all made up word salad, and somebody else said it's word salad. It's not word salad. This is a really important point, but so here's a link. This is a good little video for people who are confused, of a philosophy guy online explaining the tortoise and Achilles in 5 minutes. So here's a little 5-minute video that explains it for you. But yeah, so
Jay,
go ahead.
Email you. I'm going to email you the argument that I had written out. That's my argument, inspired by this, and then you could possibly share that. Unless you want me to do a share screen real quick. Shoot. Didn't do the. Do we have the option to do share screen? Can I do that?
No, it's not. I didn't set it up that way. I have to set it up where there's a whole separate scene that I have to put on the screen before we go live. So anyway, so. Is that the essence of your point there? I mean, do we want to move on to the other topics? Because I know you have to go here in
it's fine.
45 minutes, right? Now, also for those that are interested, my part 2 of my breakdown of Through the Looking Glass here on Rockfin and to the members for the website, I also work through this problem as well, explaining it and going through that guy's video and pointing out how it's relevant to Gödel, Escher, Bach, and so forth. So we watch a few videos that helps break that down.
That's actually an interesting question. If you're ignorant, this is almost kind of reminiscent of Plato's paradox of knowledge. Do you remember this? So if you're ignorant, it means you don't have knowledge, by definition. But if you never had knowledge, when you encounter it, how would you be able to recognize that it's knowledge if you've never had it? Do you remember this? It's Plato's paradox of knowledge. You either are a knower, you have knowledge, or you're ignorant. By definition, you don't have knowledge. How the problem is, well, then how do you ever get knowledge if you've never had it? Because then you wouldn't realize it's knowledge when you found it. Because you've never had it.
It's another way to illustrate the problem, exactly. Now, I'm using the wrong.
I was thinking about.
Yeah.
It relates to these people saying word salad. Well, wait a minute. You're ignorant. How would you know when something's word salad or not word salad?
Exactly. Yeah.
Refuted.
Yeah, I often bring that up when people say, "Oh, well, I don't accept this." For example, a year ago or so, we had a Roman Catholic who was saying, "Well, you got Augustinian theology wrong." And I said, "Well, have you read Augustine?" No. Well, then you're not in a position to know that I have it right or wrong. So how would you be able to say that?
Did you hear this story? Stop me if you heard this one. So 6-year-old runs into, what are we doing today? We're going over sigma notation here. And the 5-year-old has just learned arithmetic. And so he's obviously qualified to talk about integrals. And the 5-year-old says to the calculus professor, word salad.
No, I think the people in the chat literally are saying that.
That's sigma and integrals, computing limit. That's all a bunch of word salad, calculus professor.
Yeah, so in other words, if I don't understand it, it doesn't work, right? So who on this chat understands the intricacies of how an iPhone works? None of us. Okay, does that mean it doesn't work because we don't understand it? I mean, it's just silly. But all right, let's move on to the domain of Latin, and this actually relates because we've been very philosophical here. First question, and we want to try to get a lot of these in there. What's the difference between being scholastic and scholasticism? Because I see a lot of people, especially from last night's conversation with Sovereign Bra, where we get this idea that, well, isn't the Orthodox ethos, quote, mystical and therefore anti-rational? Aren't you guys not into academics and not into philosophy and defining things? How would you comment on that?
Yep, you got nailed this. God. Again, this was, remember in the Shishensky book with the filioque, these were already prejudices that were all the way back then. Do you remember that the Latins had towards the Orthodox Eastern Fathers?
I mean, it's very odd because if you read Gregor of Nyssa, I mean, it's super technical and philosophical. You know, he's the theologian par excellence of the Trinity at the Second Ecumenical Council of Constantinople I. So when I hear this, I'm just very mystified by this because it's just so kind of wrong-headed. The question's wrong-headed because it's confusing Latin scholasticism and its baggage and presuppositions with doing philosophy, logic, or being, quote, scholastic.
Yeah, so I mean, being scholastic as far as like philosophical hygiene and rigor, like it's obviously in the Eastern Father. I mean,
Absolutely.
it depends on what they're doing and responding to. I think that's one of the problems that you've seen in the Latin West is scholasticism itself. Not only, as you brought up, has all these unjustified presuppositions about what the system is and how you're to think. I think it takes all the other kind of topics that one would think about in life and applies to their life spiritually. And it's like, well, it has to be filtered through that system. And so, I mean, just think about like a Thomist today. I could just picture them like if somebody was like, oh my gosh, I've lost one of my family members, and what can I say? I'm in pain and suffering, and they're like, well, is it a family member qua family member, or is that a property? Like, you know what I mean? It's like you don't talk to somebody that way. I don't know if I've told you remember the joke meme of the scholastic family where the dad encounters has to have this unfortunate conversation where he finds the drugs on his son, and he says, what kind of drug? You don't know what you're talking about. Synthetic are not substances, they're accidents. And is this kind of funny thing? I'm sorry, Dad. Like, you're right. It's not. Anyways.
Yeah, it's a joke about Aristotelian philosophy. For again, the chat doesn't understand that they're lost. It's a joke about substance and accidents in Aristotelian philosophy, not car accidents. Not what we're talking about. So, anyway, so yeah, I would say too.
So don't you think that's part of the problem, though? Is everything has to be put. Scholasticism is a philosophical system that's built. It's not just about being, and scholastics tend to be intellectually rigorous. Like, I'd certainly say that. But that's different than scholasticism, which is a particular type of philosophy and systemization in which everything, think about, Aquinas has to actually talk about what we would call the mysteries of the Eucharist and transubstantiation. What? Yes, filter it.
Scientific definitions.
Talk about substance and accidents.
Yeah, I mean, let me say, let's put it this way. Somebody might think of scholasticism as can reason provide a defense for the faith, or just doing apologetics. Did the scholastics argue that? Yes. Would we agree with that? Yeah. But that's not really the essence of the problem of scholasticism. It's not doing logic or philosophy. It's the place given to philosophy. It's the assumptions of the order of theology, where, for example, in scholastic theology and philosophy, typically we begin with the essence of God, or knowing God through natural theology, supposedly, and deriving or deducing attributes of an absolutely simple, primordial, first mover essence. That's wrong. That's all wrong-headed. It's the direct opposite of what Palamas says in the Triads, that when God reveals himself in Exodus 3, the best way to understand this is the way Etienne Gilson says, when God says in Exodus 3, I am, he is saying, I am supreme essence. And Palamas says, when God says I am, he is not calling himself supreme essence. He is saying, I am he, the person of the Father. So radically different starting points for where the order of theology progresses between Palamas and Latin scholasticism.
Also, let's talk a little bit about this too, that because this is going to relate to problems that we see online. Words don't have a universal, univocal meaning.
Yeah. So the Confession of Dositheus, well, it uses some of these Latin terms, so it must mean all of the Latin theological baggage, right?
Let's see. So, and I talked about this in other papers too, and I talked to Garrity about it because in Garrity's paper, terms don't have, they're conditioned, because what does he call this? He calls this the fallacy of substitutivity of identicals in terms of epistemic and semantic context.
That's a big fancy term. For explain that for the audience, because
I just figured I'd continue with more word wizardry and word salad. So I'll explain real quick. The term God, for example, the mistake is to think that either it only has one meaning, or a general meaning. Oh, it just means creator.
It means absolutely simple. This is what Muslims do, right? God just has a single reference to a single divine.
Kind of this lowest common denominator, generic kind of idea by which we all mean by God. Now, what Garrity points out, and what I point out in my paper, is God is not univocal. It's not a proper name. So what's the difference between a common name and a proper name? So a common name would be city or state. Proper name would be Dallas. So it's unique, right? Or Jay Dyer or something like that, versus online content creator, which is a common. So God is not a proper name. It's not like a city. It's not like Jay Dyer. And furthermore, even worse, it does not pick out anything uniquely individual across all possible worlds. Now, that's just a fancy way, the fancy term for saying that it's not a rigid designator. It can pick out, it's a flaccid designator in philosophy and of language. It can pick out multiple things. God can mean, human beings are referred to. Do you not know that you are gods?
And exactly. And for those who are not clear on this, everybody should go watch Dr. Bo Branson's lectures, where he goes into the point that oftentimes theos is picking out the person of God the Father. When you get into the discussions of the Palamite synods and the letters of St. Gregory Palamas, he actually argues oftentimes against his Latin and Thomistically influenced interrogators and opponents, that God actually signifies an energy. So the word God can pick out energy, can pick out the divine person of the Father, it can pick out the other hypostases, and it can also be used of human beings who are called gods, and angels and demons that are at times called gods or deities. So it's kind of like the word deity, right? Yeah. Deity can be used of all kinds of things.
Yeah, exactly. So in that fancy phrase of the fallacy of substitutivity, just means I assume all those, therefore I can substitute it in different instances, in terms of arguments, in terms of different religions, different theological arguments. And what Garrity shows is there's a whole host of logical problems that result from that. And the reason why is you're not taking into the special character. What kind of character? Meanings of words. That's called semantics. How we know things and what that word means. That's epistemic. And what we see is that religions, philosophies, paradigms, and systems condition unique meanings of those terms. And so if you don't acknowledge that, you're going to run into a whole bunch of problems. You're going to create a whole bunch of fallacies. So this is what's going to in kind of contemporary online discussions and debates. Oh, I found this word, atonement.
That must mean penal substitutionary atonement.
Yeah, propitiation, substitution. Give me some other, or the concept of the words original sin,
or just even legal penal terminology.
Yes. Forensic language. Well, obviously, the words only have one meaning, and there's a perspicuity. I would say one of the other fallacies too is very Western Orthodox converts are bringing this in. The perspicuity of the fathers in the text. The text means what it says. Words only mean one thing, and it's the perspicuity. It's clear. It says what it means and means what it says, and it says what I mean. And what it means is this whole baggage of Calvinistic or Augustinian, right? So there's a kind of sorcery sleight of hands, right? What do I mean by that? Well, they're holding two opposite positions and they want to conceal that, right? And say, well, it's just one thing. Well, I deny this while they slip in the one thing that they're denying.
So, yeah, Basil says every heretic does this, by the way.
And this is this kind of wordplay, right? That it's what the heretic does. I think St. Irenaeus says that the heretic rearranges the mosaic with the original piece. So there's a kind of movement, right? And sorcery, look here, these are not the droids you're looking for, right? I'm moving, which one is it, right? And you're bouncing. Eric Vogelin talks about this with Hegel, this interplay between bouncing on the meanings of words, right? To kind of confuse and give an illusion of something that's untrue to get you to buy it as true. And how do I do that? I use things that are true and I do what? I mix it up, right? And then I present it as if it's all true and nothing was done. And I think that's what you see that's going on. So what you see online is that, well, no, it's just, I just cited the fathers. Are you against the fathers? I just cited the Confessions of Josephus. I mean, your problem must be with them, right? And these words obviously just mean what they say and say what they mean. While they're doing that, they're sliding in the meaning of these Calvinistic or Augustinian notions of the words while saying, no, I'm not doing that. And that's why there's a kind of sorcery and wizardry and evilness, to be honest. I'm not saying they're intentionally doing this, but the devil's certainly taking advantage of that.
And one way to explain, for example, context of this is if you have the Norman Russell version of the Palamite Synods, on page 34, the opening discussion, the history and the context, points out that this is a discussion of the context. Okay, so the context of the life of the Palamite Synods, it goes on to say that when it comes to Patriarch of Jerusalem, Dositheus, he responded to the Roman Catholic position with his Tome of Love in 1698. This was a collection of Palamite texts prefaced by a long introduction giving an account of the Hesychast controversy from the Palamite perspective. In 1727, in the context of worsening relationships with Rome, the Constantinopolitan Council again endorsed Palamism. So we have Dositheus and the Constantinopolitan Synods at this time reaffirming once again, no, the Confession of Dositheus, the theology that's laid out, is not intended to be a Roman Catholic Latin reading. It is a Palamite understanding. So that's why we can't just rely on English translations of this or that, thing from the 1700s and think that, well, it says the word transubstantiation. Therefore, that means we adopt and believe all of the Latin theology that Thomas Aquinas has. And this is the move that all these people are making, especially all these people coming out of claiming to be in the Western Rite. A lot of these people aren't even in the Western Rite. They're just saying they are online, pretending to sort of be in this position to resurrect and revamp Roman Catholic ideas under the guise of, well, it's we're in the Western Rite, so pretty much everything that's done by Roman Catholics is all good. It's cool, right? We can have devotions to the Sacred Heart, which violates the principles of Ephesus. Ephesus says you can't give devotion or veneration to parts of Christ and not to the whole Christ. So you can't venerate body parts. We don't venerate the foot of Christ or the toenails of Christ. We all venerate the whole Christ. Okay, so that cuts out the whole of Sacred Heart stuff right there. Are you coming back, or are you just like hiding back there? Like you went and hid behind your couch.
That I want, I can. And then I get my OCD, ADDs. Like, I gotta find it. Well, where is it? Where's the book? You know what? I'm going to start putting GPS trackers on all my book. And you can just, like your iPhone, and be like, lost book. Whereas, oh, here it is. Anyways, I was trying to look for a book that was saying exactly what you're saying, too, about this kind of wordplay and stuff like that. So, we've talked about, this is something about, if I tie it back into the Orthodox Montanica, the last year's theme was first things. No, sorry, that was my paper. It was seek first the kingdom of God, which is my paper obviously fell on first things. And this will talk about the kind of differences between why are people having these sorts of kind of problems, and why does the West generally have this kind of problems? And scholasticism, why is that an issue? Is that there's this primary kind of assumption in the West, generally speaking, that the way that you know God is through the intellectum, the mind. And so this is why you got natural theology, and you have every single autonomous epistemology. I start with my mind first. And this gets exemplified, I think, by the time it just plays out into Descartes.
Yeah, it's a summation of that.
In his mind.
I think, therefore I am. Yeah, exactly. Not God's I am, but I
think, therefore I am, therefore God is. Everything's dependent on, and I think it's just a kind of natural outplane of this. But in Orthodoxy, that's not true. We don't know God through our mind. In fact, our mind is usually an impediment and problem because it's disordered, right?
It's a tool, and it's something that Christ assumed in his human nature as part of having a rational soul. So the Constantinople I and later council's rejection of Apollinarianism includes the notion of Christ assuming a rational soul to heal it. So the reasoning faculty in the mind is not itself bad, but it can be a stumbling block and an idol. And it's not the chief means by which we know God. That's the heart. The intellect has to return to the heart to function properly. So it's not that the intellect itself is the bad thing. Exactly. And I know you weren't saying that, but a lot of times people make this Apollinarian mistake, even in Orthodoxy, where they say that the rational faculty is itself bad. That's actually a version of the Apollinarian heresy.
Yeah, that's right. So there's things that happen and you can do so that you run the way that you think. You don't think correctly. And I need a guide. I need my heart in the life of God. We say this in the liturgy. Show me what I must do and think. I'm trying to remember. It's I don't actually say it. The priest actually.
Can we transition? I want you to read that, but that's a good transition to the notion of what true and false mysticism is, right? Because, for example, Catholics will hear this and say, "Oh, but well, we have all kinds of mystics. We've got mystic women that float around, and the host that floats around, and we've got mystical circumcision pieces that are given as wedding rings, and we've got." We've got all kinds of mysticism. John of the Cross's Dark Night of the Soul. So, yeah, hey, we're all on the same page here. It's a very different approach to the notion of stillness and Orthodox mysticism, quote unquote, which is all a unified experience. In other words, we would say Paul, Moses, David, all the way up to St. Simeon, the new theologian. It's all the same experience. There's not all these wild cascading cornucopia of histrionics. There's only one experience of seeing the divine light. It's a unified experience, and it's very different from the Roman Catholic notion of cultivating imaginal prayer, or prayer by imagination, where you constantly sort of try to conjure up in your mind images of myself in hell and what the torments would be like. This is, if you read Alphonsus Liguori, this is what he says to do. Teresa, I think, of Avila talks about imagination and being very creative with how you imagine these things. And we shy away from that precisely because the Roman Catholic sphere is diluted through all of these apparitions and visions and imaginations, and it's all just prelast, and it doesn't actually cultivate the unified experience of seeing the divine light.
So, yeah, bringing that back to, again, reason is good. Come, let us reason together, as Scripture says. But the way that I know God and the way that I know the world is not primarily through. This is the way I like to say: the intellect and the senses can commune and piggyback on the right of the nous, the heart.
Exactly.
So when I start acquiring the eyes of God, when I enter into, and how do I do that? Well, the same way that you say, like, your wife. I don't know my wife because I read her resume and I do deductions and things like this, correct? I don't even say that I know her causally. I remember Christopher Tomasłowski was actually saying you do, and I'm like, no, I did. Like, again, causality and the way that my intellect perceives this and stuff can piggyback on the ride, and come along for the ride. But the primary way that I know my wife is noetically. The person, the prosopon, the face-to-face encounter, right, transcends the intellect. The intellect is ordered and enlightened.
Well, people have to understand that in the Roman Catholic system, dogmatically, you don't have a direct experience of God in this life. You have a created veil of causal effects that you know God supposedly through. And we don't deny that there are created means, icons or pieces of wood. But where we disagree is that we think the divine energies come through and really do give us a face-to-face encounter in the here and now, as Paul says in 2 Corinthians 3. Roman Catholics do not believe that. They do not believe that in this life you experience the divine directly. So it's a huge gap between our theology and their theology. And it's precisely because they do not believe in the doctrine of the nous, or the heart. They believe that the highest faculty in man is the intellect. And so who is God defined as? God is defined as the beatific vision wherein the intellect is satiated in the eschaton. So the highest goal of man in Roman Catholicism is to have the intellect satiated by seeing the divine essence. That's not the Orthodox view of the eschaton. The Orthodox view is that man is resurrected in a body. He moves about again in a deified body, in a deified flesh. It's not restricted to an intellectual process. I know that Roman Catholics believe in the resurrection. Okay, so you don't have to whine about that. But I'm saying that the focus of their doctrine of beatific vision is not the bodily resurrection. It's the intellectual satiation that occurs by seeing the divine essence, which we think is all ludicrous. You don't see the divine essence. It's crazy. So very different views, very different systems. But this is precisely why you have such a different manifestation of saints and what it is to be a saint and what the mystical union even is. So could you speak to this, Father Deacon, at a practical level? Why do you have a
Well,
problem?
before that, I'm going
Yeah.
to add one thing. The reason why people get their theology wrong is, like you said, the Ordo Theology of a parish with a priest and partaking in the sacraments, the sacramental life in a real way, and developing real relationships, not only with the priest.
Yeah,
And
but a Roman Catholic's going to say, well, we do that, but it's not the same thing in the sense of different Trinitarian theologies.
well, again, which one's first is what. Okay, so yeah, but that informs you of going to read the theology. And it seems to me that, and I think you're getting a lot of this with the converts, is, well, wait a minute, I want to argue my case online. I should be able to do this. But that's not how we do things in Orthodoxy. You acquire the Holy Spirit, right? You acquire the Trinitarian incarnational life in conversation and learning with the priest, and then you'll start to be able to understand the kind of more rigor, right, of the more complicated theology and being able to discuss. So I think there's a prescribed way, and there's a prescribed way of getting credentials too, of not only how to learn is laity, but to, as you go on, whether you decide to become clergy or laity, the education, theological education that's prescribed. A lot of these people, they're not used to that, right? So this is a kind of hierarchical, it's an ordered, it's not a free for all. That doesn't mean that everybody's perfect through that, but it's the prescribed way. And so what we're getting is that sounds so bizarre in the West, and particularly in the United States, right? Because I think that we're anti-hierarchical as modernists, and certainly as Americans and freedom, and we want to climb to the top as fast as possible. And so people actually think, well, I should be able to argue online. I should be able to have, debates online without going to the prescribed, because that's hard work. And you know what? It requires some getting rid of pride and humility that I actually have to listen to or get a blessing from my priest or something like that. And I don't want to do that. I want the fame. I want all of this, and I should be able to argue my position. And I think that's why you're seeing a lot of this bad theology, because it's very clear whether it's penal substitution. How do I really know that penal substitute? I could know that without reading all of the stuff here that I have that clearly know that these are foreign kind of doctrines, and all the other, whether it's Nestorianism or Arianism, the various heresies that they imply. I can know that penal substitution, that absolute divine simplicity is incorrect. How do I know that? Because without even reading these books, because I formed a relationship at the parish level with the priests, and it becomes noetically known, right, and can be then delivered up to my intellect that it's wrong. I talked to Father Russell. I talked to Father Andrew. I talked to Father Cornell. All the priests,
Okay.
Father Moses.
Let me ask you a question, because immediately we're going to have the retort. Well, but you know good and well, we all know that a lot of priests are liberal. A lot of priests don't even know about the theology. They've got bad theology out there. Not a lot of them, but many of them do. Some of them do it for sure. So you're telling me I'm just supposed to trust some guy who doesn't even know, what Palamas wrote about the energies, and that's my because that's the first thing they're going to say.
Yeah. Well, here's the dialectic. It's an either or. They've set up in their mind that, yes, there are liberal priests. Like, it doesn't always work. That's what I said. It doesn't always work. What is what's the alternative? I lean on my own understanding because I can't trust anybody, but I'm not educated in this. I haven't acquired the virtues. I don't have the discernment. And I'm not qualified in any sense to actually make a decision of what's correct dogmatically, theologically, or even who to trust. So they're stuck in this dialectics. I understand. I understand you can't trust every priest. However, it's the prescribed way. It's just like the general notion of the university, which is even worse, right? Like most professors are liberal, and you're not going to get a great education. Well, should we get stuck in the dialectic?
Well, I guess we should throw out we throw out education, right? It doesn't matter anymore, right?
Let's not have anybody qualified at all because we have the internet. I have people saying this too. I can learn logic and modal logics from just buying books. Why do I have to pay you as an educator to go for it? That's why half the people are retarded online, saying all this different stupid stuff and saying, "Well, it's word salad." You're ignorant, and you don't lack the virtues. So, if you just do the small things in the church, you'll begin to get discernment. But these people are young, right? They either have, usually as clergy, we can identify there's particular vices they haven't overcome, right? They haven't acquired the spiritual virtues to give discernment. So I can acknowledge, sure, you're not in a position to actually know who's right or wrong on this because you haven't overcome. Do you see what I'm saying? The prescription is you need to acquire the virtues and you're not there. Yes, there are liberal priests. Okay, but now this is becoming weird. Okay, so suppose I grant it to them. Become odd when it's like, yeah, but every priest that we bring on, every bishop is saying the opposite of your position. So what do they say? Oh, they're modernists. They're influenced by Romanites. That's why I joked online. I'm like, there's nothing you can do to convince somebody of a shy of God working on their heart and their pride. Because I always thought like, well, the deacon's lying. He doesn't know what he's talking about. No priest ever says. So what do? I bring out priests and academics. Oh, they're all wrong. Let's get a bishop on the issue. No, he's wrong. Let's get 2 bishops, 3 bishops. That's why I joked. You could put together an ecumenical council. And they'll be like, it's a robber council. It's not right. Like, does that not say something about you that everybody's wrong? And they're all traditional, right? The priests that we're all bringing on, they're all they're not Roman.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's a lot of people influenced by Protestantism. The idea is that,
it is.
you know, even the Roman Catholic and Orthodox world, we're all suffused in America. We're suffused with these Protestant ideas of like just individualism, and I don't need authority, and I don't need to, you know, listen to anybody else. I'm sufficient on my own. I'm a radical individual. And this, what happens is that it begins with intellectual ideas, and then it moves into, then people think, oh, God's actually talking to me. I saw the divine light. I'm now, you know, an online elder. And it just gets worse and worse. And it's the same delusion a lot of the Roman Catholics that, for example, there was a guy not too long ago saying, oh, well, I chose Roman Catholicism because, you know, when I was, you know, looking at these issues, I was praying the rosary, and I felt this overwhelming sense of bodily peace that filled the room, and that let me know that Roman Catholicism was true. And it's like, just so, and we find the same thing with a lot of people who, when they're presented with a lot of the issues, we had the guy that was on last night, right? What do you do with all these issues? Well, anytime I'm confronted with a lot of contradictions, I shut my mind off and I go to Fatima. I go to apparitions. I pray the rosary. So I'd like to move into that, to the notion of prelest and delusion. And Father Deacon, what would you say to a person who says, look, I'm Catholic. I just fall back on the mystical. I fall back on, you know, we've got John of the Cross. We've got our mystics. And Fatima, you know, shows me that Our Lady has blessed and confirms the Roman Catholic Church is the true church.
So, yeah, I mean, it kind of ties into a previous question I was going to ask, and I won't go into that conversation anymore, but it is helpful to ask, like, for example, these people, like, what would it take to convince you? of this, or like, what do you actually want? So, with a Roman Catholic, it might be like, and what this is going to reveal is there's not actually good answers. These are psychological reasons. They're not justified, and they're unjustified. They're not good reasons for holding a belief. So if we ask somebody, well, why do you believe in Roman Catholicism, or what would it take for you to convert, or something like that? So what are they really saying? Well, I need a miracle. If I had this feeling, right? Well, we can induce that feeling. We could give you drugs and make you feel. Is that going to prove it for you? What I'm trying to get to these people to realize is, why is that a good? These are kind of higher order, justification questions. Why is that a good reason? And how can you actually trust that? What does it have to do with truth? Okay, so you're telling me if I just make you feel something or make you hallucinate, that's enough?
Yeah, I mean, what happens on the days when you wake up and you suddenly don't feel that peace and you feel like Roman Catholicism might not be true? Like, is that
it's terrible?
How do you adjudicate between the one that's true and the one that's false?
Yes. Oh, well, no, I need a miracle. What's a miracle? Something can't be explained. I mean, obviously, this is not created by human. This would be a testament of God. So anything that I can't explain, well, that must be proof that that's the true religion. And so, Medjugorje, Fatima. Give me another one.
Well, you went to the one in Ireland. What was that weird one that was like a corporation?
Gallagher. I always want to say Sarah Gallagher, but it's not Sarah Gallagher. It's the House of Prayer.
Yeah.
House of Prayer. Yeah, these people. Christina Gallagher. Had these visions, and a lot of the same thing too. The sun was dancing, and there were like things, and she appeared in the clouds. So, well, that's like, well, how do you know that's legitimate? Well, it's unexplainable. Well, other religions claim things like that and do stuff that's, to be honest, beyond my explanation. I'm like, that's would constitute as a miracle. Hindus, stuff like that. Yeah, but what did we see last night? But 10,000 people saw. What did the guy say with Fatima? 50,000?
Yeah, the number always changes. 50, 70,000, 50,000. Yeah, who knows?
Oh, that's when. So you're telling me if I create through Operation Bluebeam, which both Jay and I are working with the CIA really hard right now, to manufacture a miracle with 50,000 people. Is that the magic number?
Yeah, I think you said 50 was enough to make sure that it's the magic number. Yeah.
But if it was 49,999, that wouldn't. That's the cut. That's where it's just like, what is the proportion, right?
Well, and to be clear about this, from an academic perspective, people should understand this is not a conspiracy text. Michael Graziano's book on the history of CIA and religion, he's an academic at University of Northern Iowa. This is published by University of Chicago Press. It's not published by, a conspiracy publisher. It's not Adventures Unlimited Press. There's multiple cases where he says the CIA was, using staged apparitions, staged Marian claims. They were a big part of the Fatima Rosary Crusade in Latin and South America as part of the Cold War. And then the CIA under, what's his face? The Filipino operative guy. This is a really important guy. He's the one that actually said we should stage a second coming of Christ in Cuba to, bring the Roman Catholics in Cuba back from under Castro. Ed Lansdale. So Ed Lansdale proposed the fake second coming. I'm not joking. They didn't do it, but he proposed it. Page 138, 139 of Graziano's book. So, you have to understand these apparitions have a very important geopolitical role. And there's an academic that I recommend. He wrote this paper here. His name is Daniel Wojcik. I'm not sure what.
Wojak.
No, not Wojak. I'm not sure what university he's at. Let's see. Professor of English Studies at Oregon. And his paper is The Virgin and the Bomb. It's an in-depth study of the Bayside apparitions and how crucial Bayside was to the Cold War. I put that link in the chat. Everybody should read that paper. And he goes into a lot of detail of how, there's actually, this was sedevacantism really before sedevacantism was a thing. So it actually comes out of this obvious, CIA Cold War operation. I forget the woman's name at Bayside, but she was.
So we have great evidence.
Hold on. So she actually made a lot of failed prophecies. Veronica. Okay, Veronica Lucan, who's the seer of Bayside, and she said America will be nuked by the Soviets. There will be a Soviet invasion, and here it is. I'm looking at the page right now. Russia plans to invade the United States with missiles. This is the Bayside apparition newspaper of 1983. It's going to get nuked. She gave all these. There's warheads in abandoned New York subways. This is all like CIA bullshit, honestly. So people can read that article. It's got images of the news clippings from that time. And what they wanted to do, there's also grifters involved in this. It's not just CIA stuff. There's people who are grifting and making money on these apparitions. The one that Father Deacon mentioned in Ireland, whatever it's called.
Gallagher.
Yeah, that's actually it's a corporation now, LLC.
It's a corporation.
Yeah.
So that gives good evidence to a counter narrative to. But let's look. These people, like this guy last night was saying there are 50,000. How do I know? Because there was a news article about it. So that's all it takes. I could fake a news article from 100 years ago or whatever. When was Fatima?
Yeah, like 1917, 16, 17, somewhere in there.
Yeah, that's all it takes for you to believe something. I literally fake. So we know the CIA and governments are involved in this. We know there would be reasons for, right? Because like in a court of law, don't you always look for motive? Okay, so we have motive. Why would somebody do? Do you have a character assessment? Is this the type of person or institution that would do something like this? Oh yeah, they have a whole history of doing that. Okay, and then you're telling me, and if they faked a news story, which you have no access to the real event or interviewing these people, that would be enough for you, especially in light of those two things that we just mentioned, for you to believe it was a legitimate miracle. That's ridiculous. What a stupid reason. Also, again, miracles don't prove something. It can be but the fact of the matter is, how can it prove it when your theology is wrong? You're telling me if I came up with, give me a theory of something that we just know is false. It's just silly.
The moon's made of cheese.
Yeah.
Or bat people on the moon, because that was actually the first major hoax news story from 1840, 30s or whatever it was. The bat people on the moon story is literally the first major print news fake news story. It's very famous, and so.
Oh no! You know what we should ask these people? So you're telling me all it takes for how weak-willed are you? And easily manipulated. So this person obviously doesn't believe in Mormonism, right? Which is a sci-fi space polytheism religion. We could just ask them, if Mormonism produced the same thing you're telling me, despite you knowing it's wrong and the theology is retarded, you would believe it? Because that's what we know about Roman Catholicism. Like, you can't, it has to be true. it can't be false. And because many false religions can produce false signs, correct? It just means you're really easily, we should just call that, be like, you're really easily duped and manipulated. Congratulations. You're in a cult. Find this.
I'm not ignoring you. I'm pulling up the old news stories. So here's the Portuguese newspaper at the time reporting on Fatima. It's kind of like a little blurry thing. It's hard to see, but this is the newspaper from that time. And then let me show you another news article. I don't think it's not Fatima, but it's kind of like the same idea. This is in the Cold War, another example of Cold War. Virgin tears miracles appear in New Orleans, right? So we get a plethora of these kinds of Marian apparition stories that are always popping up. And the point is that, let's see, here's another one that's supposed to be like the big news article. So here's this old news article about Fatima. And I mean, so I see a picture of a lot of people. I see another picture up top of a lot of people. Okay, I have no idea where or what these images are. And although there could a miraculous, prior even to the Cold War, the communists that would fake photos and stage photos all the time. Western intelligence faked and staged photos all the time. I mean, you guys, just think about the recent conflict in the Middle East. Both sides have staged and faked images and atrocities, and they've both been called out. Think about Ghost of Kiev, right? That story went up. Everybody bought into it in the normie boomer world, and everybody knew that was Sam Hyde, right? Sam Hyde was not the Ghost of Kiev. So you see how easy it is to promulgate these things. And oh yeah, well of course 70,000 people in a village in the middle of nowhere in Portugal. You interview these people and try to get to the bottom of it. And I want to say a couple more things too, because a lot of Orthodox want to try to. We had an interesting discussion develop underneath last night's show with Sovereign Bra on the issue of Fatima. And people were, first of all, spurging out because I said, where did the communism in Russia come from? And then everybody starts debating about whether Russia was the first communist state, and they're trying to correct me. I don't care about the first communist government. What I said was, where did the communism in Russia come from? It was exported from New York and London. That was the point. So I don't care about the Paris Commune. I know what the Paris Commune is. I'm not talking about what the first government. Plato's Republic was the first communist government, way before Paris Commune. What I was talking about was what Fatima says about Russia spreading her errors to the rest of the world. And the whole world, ever since that time, even if you want to argue that that's not what Mary originally meant, if this is even Mary, it has been interpreted as the spread of communism throughout the world. So it has a clear, Cold War, eventually a Cold War agenda. I know that this precedes the Cold War. But my point was that why doesn't Mary talk about the real origins and source of communism? Because it's not Russia. But she gives the implication that Russia is the one that caused it and has spread its errors across the world, then giving justification to the Anglo-American establishment's opposition to Russia for the next, basically the last 100 years back to the Great Game. So Mary also talks about her Immaculate Heart, and that clearly gives credence to the notion of Immaculate Conception. So the idea that Orthodox should appropriate or need to appropriate Fatima, to me, is ludicrous. There's so many things in Fatima that, for example, making reparations. None of this stuff is Orthodox theology. And furthermore, so we're supposed to think that now Mary now appears to Portuguese Roman Catholic children. Okay, are we going to start accepting all of the apparitions of Mary to Catholics? You see how this opens the floodgates. I'm not interested in any apparitions because whether you're Roman Catholic or Orthodox, what about Mary's apparition in Zaytun to the Monophysites? This is another famous apparition. Okay, so you see how this gets us nowhere, because a Coptic is going to say, well, Mary appeared to us. That was the real Marian apparition. You've heard of the Zaytun apparition, right, Father Deacon?
Yeah, where it's like a light on top of it's like thing of the I seen the pictures of.
Well, so does that mean that Coptic theology is true? Mary appeared there.
Well, everybody has miracles. I guess it's perennialism's true. Like it's all they all verified that every religion's true.
Well, that one guy admitted that last night. He was like, "Well, no, I'm not even saying that Mary can't appear to the Orthodox." Well, so wait a minute. If Marian apparitions prove that Catholicism's true, but now Mary can appear to the Orthodox, then you've undercut your argument that apparitions prove Catholicism.
Yeah. Here's another thing.
Yeah.
Because I've heard Protestants say this too, like they talk about having a miracle. I mean, heck, didn't his name's Yusuf now, but the musician from the 70s, you know what I'm talking about.
You're talking about Cat Stevens.
Cat Stevens, forgive me. He had a miracle, right? God saved him from drowning or something and led him to
Islam. Oh, I didn't know that was his reason for conversion. Interesting.
I think that's what, I mean, I could be wrong about it. You guys can check it out. But it was like he prayed to God that he would believe and convert. But so he had this miracle that led him to Islam. Well, why is God leading him to Islam? That's crazy. I've heard Protestants say like, you know, they had an encounter with Christ and they had this miracle. Well, why aren't you Orthodox then? So Christ led you into a false religion and a cult? Like, what does the matter with you? So I'd say just throw it back on them. I'd be like, well, couldn't be a legitimate miracle because it led you into a cult or a false religion. So there. What are they going to say? Notice.
Well, I'm looking at, by the way, I'm looking at Roman Catholic websites talking about how it is the Virgin Mary that's appearing at Zaytun, Egypt. So it's like, okay, so wait a minute. Looks like now basically Mary's just a proof for ecumenism.
Yeah. You either become an ecumenist or you convert to Oriental Orthodox, or I like to say just Orientals. All right, so something else is kind of interesting about this phenomenon. So we live in a time that philosophically is influenced by what? Existentialism and phenomenology, correct? And there's a sort of kind of a death of metaphysics, right? We certainly lived in the afterbirth of that. Wouldn't you agree? It's kind of postmodern, relativistic, where, well, we just bracket or reject kind of metaphysics and therefore restrict it to the appearance and the phenomenological nature of things, and existence precedes essence, and it's, you know, right? It's all about the experience and stuff like this. Do you not think that perhaps that a lot of these people themselves could be influenced by something like this? So, the arguments don't matter with these sorts of people. It doesn't matter that it's like their system's patently false or any arguments. They had the experience, you see. Why is it that experience and sensation, the phenomenal sensations, is overcoming the intellect? It's kind of weird, isn't it? They don't care about the arguments. All they care about is having an experience. And in this sense, evangelicals are certainly put into that camp, correct? It's all about the experience over everything else. Now, of course, we Orthodox, we see the goodness of experience, but in the right place, in the right kind of ordered, measured.
Well, and also a lot of times the experience of God is conflated with my internal mental states and emotions. So, charismatics, Protestants, evangelicals, I feel God when I'm at the worship service and my hands are raised and I'm crying. That's God. No, that's your emotions. Okay, so you can't. This is why delusion is a very prelest is a very powerful delusion drug, because we get sort of huffed up on smelling our own toots and thinking that we're anointed prophets of God, like all these charismatics think.
Yeah. And I think you certainly see there's some videos too of where this obviously charismaticism and it's kind of the evangelical ideas came in to Roman Catholicism too, and obviously the World Council of Churches and
Oh, thank you.
this
Exactly. Yeah, we just mentioned this on our charismatic live stream. Yeah, we have to mention that the Roman Catholic Church has, from the top down, papally approved post Vatican II, the charismatic movement wholesale. Absolutely.
also see the connection too that was promoted through the World Council of Churches um, of liberation theology. So where did all of this kind of charismaticism and clown masses originate, right? Or like become popular? Brazil, Latin America. Oh, that's really interesting. That's exactly where the World Council of Churches were promoting what? Liberation theology. So all of this is to say it's totally manufactured. It's fake and gray. And um again, if what do you think the elites are really concerned about? Like any cult, lowering critical thinking.
Control.
You'll
Yeah.
never find a cult teaching a critical thinking class. And then what? High on emotivism and group, right? So you have to have a group emotive experience. Right now, they obviously do this in a geopolitical and ecclesial way. You can actually train somebody to be easily Pavlovian manipulated, but we just give them experiences. They just have experience. Well, of course, you're going to fall for fake Fatima stuff. You've been trained to think this way and being manipulated for years since you were born.
Yes,
And
we
it's
have.
just my thought.
Anonymous says for $5, is it true that Thomas Aquinas said to burn his writings on his deathbed, or is that a rumor? I mean, it's one of these stories that we hear. There's a lot of legends around everybody who's prominent and famous that dies. I don't know if that's true. Have you heard, Father Deacon, if that's the case?
It's one of those stories too that yeah, it's all straw. That you know, I don't know as far as how to confirm this, but he had like obviously the story is he had some type of mystical experience. And some people say like he had a mental breakdown. It wasn't a mystical, which brings up a lot of kind of interesting things. Is it a legitimate mystical experience? Is it a breakdown? But I'll remember, I don't remember if it was my graduation or if it was another graduation that I was attending at Thomas Aquinas College. But talk about prelate. So the commencement speaker was talking about the life of Aquinas. And it must have not been my graduation because I was thinking about in my mind, I contrasted it to Orthodox saints and I was like, whoa. But there's a story that Aquinas, it's like all this lore that when he died, he basically is having this discussion with God as he's entering, exiting life and going to the pearly gates that sort of like the rich young ruler. Lord, I've done all these things. I've kept all the I've kept the Sabbath. I've done all these things. And then Aquinas ends, open the doors and receive me. Like I've written all these things. I've served you. I'm like, well, he's gonna tell God how it is, I guess. Just the opposite of what you would see Anna says. So
Well, and that's what the rabbis do. The rabbis are always correcting God and tricking him and judging him. So
yeah. So this gets into the issue of again, like prelist. And certainly if you don't have any kind of even conceptual hardware as far as to be watchful that there is even a thing called prelist, then I mean, how easily are you going to be manipulated?
yeah,
How do you know you're not having a mental breakdown and it's or it's a real It's a really
Yeah, how do we discern? We got to have a standard to discern the spirits. Seraphim Leo says, and this is very relevant for $1. My argument against the Marian apparitions in Roman Catholicism would be the argument that we use against stigmata. Before the schism, Marian apparitions were not inventing new worships and new doctrines. If this was an integral spiritual experience, where was this in the first 1,000 years? Yeah, exactly. And by the way, Fatima is intimately tied to the Rosary, which technically there's nothing in the decades of the Rosary that's unorthodox. The problem is that affirming the Rosary as an orthodox would then kind of imply that, oh, well, the Rosary was really then given as a miracle to Dominic or Saint Dominic amongst the Roman Catholics. Roman Catholics, which is where we get the Dominican order. This is where this comes from. So you're basically implicitly saying that, yeah, that was Mary appearing to Dominic. Mary gave the Roman Catholics the Rosary. Mary talked to the children of Sister Lucy at Fatima, even though they're all Roman Catholic. Yeah, we should do prayers of reparation. This is all part of Fatima, you see. So accepting Fatima accepts all of these other Roman Catholic doctrines, you see. It's sort of like it goes together. It would make no sense to say that it's an Orthodox apparition with all of this Roman Catholic baggage and theology and ideology.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of this stuff is coming in through Western Rite, unfortunately. And I know that...
By the way, it actually even says that the Pope will consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. The implying that Russia's in schism and it needs to return to the papacy. So it blows my mind that Orthodox would want to make this part of our tradition. It's just silly. Obviously, it's not Orthodox. And by the same logic, we have to accept the apparitions at Zaytun. So so people are asking what it is. There's a link to a Roman Catholic website explaining the basic so-called revelations of Fatima. I mean, it's clearly it would be all bound up with Roman Catholicism. And then you have the pictures. By the way, there's no actual pictures of the miracle. There's just pictures of people standing there. So it's like, this could be people from, like, I don't know, World War II famine. You know, this could be a photo of a bunch of people lined up to get food. In some famine setting. I have no idea what these photos are. It's just a bunch of villagers.
Well, isn't this what we always see in modern politics? That like they have some picture of some poor kids all burned up or something like, and they were like, "Well, wait a minute, that was
Dusty Boy." They did this with the Syrian Dusty Boy.
Dusty Boy, yeah. And then they were like, "Well, no, that's not actually in the Ukraine at all. That was a picture from 30 years ago." And it's just like they're constantly doing that. Or this just, what if it was just staged? We need you guys to all send, we're going to take a photo. This would be great.
Well, newspaper agencies, especially things like AP, Reuters, they have vast archives of stock footage, stock photos. Again, they could be, I sent you the link there if you want to pull up the actual images of what's supposed to be Fatima. There's no actual images of any miracle. Or some apparition or anything. It's just a picture of a bunch of people standing there. So how am I supposed to know that? Oh, well, that's the miracle because there's a bunch of people standing there. See, and by the way, none of these people ever know anything about geopolitics. I mean, if these were people who were at least somewhat fluent in the way that psyops works in media and media presentations, and were familiar with basic books like this, I might be more akin to listen to them, but they never have any familiarity with this topic at all, which is obviously an element to this.
They all look like gypsies to me, and you can't trust a gypsy. Don't they look like gypsies? Yeah, I see it. Yeah, who knows? I can't hear you.
Yeah, we've got a bunch of people standing here with like the back of their head facing something. And then there's another picture of some villagers. I mean, they could be Portuguese people. They could be Romanian. They could be anything.
It could be anything,
So let's scroll down to the next image. There's like people looking up at the sky praying. none of which tells me that that's true or that it's a miracle. It's just people praying. It could be anything.
Wow, how easily fooled people are.
Let's see. Seraphim Leo, $1. It's amazing how many people eat up everything the pop scientists say about man evolving from fish, things happening on stars that are billions and billions of light years away. But the moment someone says something from logic, they'll say word salad, and then Dunning-Kruger kicks in. And Dunning-Kruger bros will have none of it. Sean, $3. What is your opinion of the monks of Esphegminu Monastery? I don't know anything about that monastery. Father Deacon, do you have a comment on that? Is this something on Athos that relates to like the schism between Bartholomew and MP? So aren't the monasteries kind of split half and half? They're Russian and Greek.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know the controversy, Sean. So I know you got to go pretty soon, so we're coming up on a couple hours. Do you have any concluding comments on anything that we've discussed? Wisdom about approaching these issues, everything from Latin theology, Western Rite, apparitions, arguing theology online, Twitter drama. Any closing wisdom?
Yeah, I mean, all the clergy that I've talked to, we're extremely skeptical of Western Rite. I mean, at some point, if something's causing so much problems, wouldn't you just shut it down after a while? Like, even if there's some good elements in it and good people, or, it's legitimate in some sense, like, I would just think. And I know they like to quote St. John Maximovich, but I found some stuff where he was actually skeptical of it himself. So it's a really kind of weird phenomenon that I think that a lot of problems and issues and a lot of this kind of stuff, I mean, all this stuff's coming through that we've been seeing online recently is through Western Rite, like people attending and promoting Western Rite stuff. And what else should I say about it's not clear to me that St. Tikhon was the other person too that was critical, even though he endorsed it, that it was supposed to be a permanent rite.
Yeah, I've heard these
that would be
critiques.
Established in parallel. The ethos feels entirely different. And I know that the late Bishop Metropolitan Callistus Ware had that critique too. It's the aesthetic and the ethos, the lifestyle is just patently different. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I do want to add that we're not saying that the individuals and everybody in every chapel and every priest is the problem. It's that certain people who are young converts that go into the Western Rite then feel like they don't get a good catechesis. They immediately want to promote everything that's Augustinian. They don't get grounded in the essence energy distinction, which is a key point of why we don't accept everything in Augustine. And they feel the need to then resurrect and restore all of the things that are particularly Roman Catholic and bring it into Orthodoxy, like the Rosary and Sacred Heart. It's just a constant thing. And by the way, over the years, most of the time that we've seen people leave Orthodoxy, it's a lot of times people leaving through the Western Rite.
Yep.
But I have been to good Western Rite parishes. The one in St. Louis.
I know a good Western Rite priest.
Yeah, there's a good one in St. Louis where our buddy Justin came into the church, and that priest is a solid dude there. He's a big supporter of what we do. So I'm not knocking everybody, but there is a real issue with, because I mean, at that parish they do good catechesis and they teach the essence energy distinction, but not every one of these does that. Sometimes it's just straight up like, oh, well, we're the same as Roman Catholics. So it seems to be a really weird avenue for ecumenism.
Yeah. What else should we say too? That was a great stream. Again, I think a lot of people online are getting upset that clergy give advice. I've accused us as gatekeepers. I'll just end with this. But you have to understand clergy are gatekeepers. Um, we have a certain kind of duty to protect the faithful and advise. What do we say to the bishop? We pray for the bishop to rightly divide the word of truth, to separate falsehood from veracity, protect the flock, right? We're all the clergy, the three orders of the clergy at different levels and different ways commissioned to do that. And we have something really new that we haven't had to deal with before, and that's online. But there are faithful online. There's serious problems, like Jay just said. You can know it by the fruits without even getting into all the theology. A lot of these groups and people, it's motivated by hate. There's anger. We had a guy last night come on, right? One of the Diamond Brothers, and it was just, you could feel the bad mojo energy, right? It's like, hey, man, take
Well,
it
I mean,
easy.
it was one of their young followers, but yeah.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is you can pick up on this. But the other thing too is a lot of these people, even in like the haters, even in Orthodoxy, that get into these groups, they find themselves outside of the church. And so it's not only that the people are getting confused and believing in heresy, it's spiritually, morally destructive for them. And oftentimes they become apostates. We've seen this over and over again. So the clergy who do have the authority to advise, look, we're going to hunt you down and be like, you're not allowed. I'm telling you, you're not under obedience. All parishioners, whether in an individual parish or just generally, are just receiving advice from clergy. You're free to be wrong. You're free to destroy your life. Every priest knows that. And if a priest really does try to control beyond just advising, beware. That's a sign of spiritual abuse. So when we say clergy are gatekeepers, what we're trying to do is advise in a very new territory, to provide some order and reason and guidelines for good, proper Orthodox content, uh, online. What's the word I'm looking for? Interactions, discussions, etc. Why? Because we ultimately love all of you and we don't want to see you hurt. And, that makes people angry. And I think it's because what Jay said, that deep down inside people are prideful. They're, especially as Americans, anti-hierarchical, anarchical, and want to do what they want to do. And they want the recognition without doing the hard work. It just plays on all the kind of typical human vices that we have. And so, again, we're going to have to become clear as clergy, as far as we gave, some kind of rules that, look, don't be getting your theology from people who are, first of all, anonymous. Why? Because there's no accountability. We don't even know if these people are Orthodox. It's the same reason why parents are saying, don't talk to people you don't know if it's an old creeper man. You have no idea who's behind, right? There's no accountability, and it's extremely dangerous. Number two, suppose the person isn't anonymous. Do they have an explicit blessing to teach? If no, don't listen to them. Don't get your theology from. Go the prescribed way. Does that mean every priest is right? And no, it doesn't. But it's
There's still a prescribed way, yeah.
Yeah. Learn from your community and your priest. Be plugged in. Do the little things. I'm even talking about like coffee hour, right? Be involved in the little things. Have a little humility. You don't have to become the new popular dude online that everybody follows. Okay. Talk to your priest about your internet usage, just in general. Not to even mention, like, should I be an online content provider? What topics? But just in general, healthy usage. Times there's digital fasting. This is something you all want to talk to your priest about. But again, we're giving these guidelines as advice because kind of way, and there's going to be new challenges. Somebody did have a good question. Well, what constitutes is teaching? Excellent question. I saw that on X today. Because what does that mean? Orthodox can never discuss or debate something online about their faith? No, that doesn't mean that. So I would say this. Certainly, if you're a content provider or you have a big enough following, when you talk about orthodoxy, you're now moving into, right, what? Teaching. Because people are listening to you. You have an impact. You're an influencer. So if you are an influencer and happen to be Orthodox, it might be good to be, hey, look, this is just my opinion. I don't know. Go talk to the priest, correct? It's good how not to fall into the teaching. Stay general, correct, about what you discuss. There's nothing wrong talking about generally about what your faith is, correct? Where you start to move into what would be perceived as teaching, you're getting into complicated or controversial issues, correct? You could be perceived as what? Teaching. If you're calling out clergy member or bishops, you're perceived as being as teaching. If you're presenting yourself as authoritative on these matters, that would be an issue of teaching. It's not just casual, once in a while I talk about these issues, but you're frequently online, Twitter, Facebook, other things, discussing or debating theology, you're teaching. Really, anything beyond the occasional general conversation about or sharing one's faith would move into teaching. Or, like I said, presenting yourself as I'm right, these people are wrong on. Does that make sense? So I think that's a great, we'll have to be kind of clear about that.
Yeah.
And maybe we need to write up like what's good internet conduct for Orthodox Christians and behavior, one's teaching and one's not teaching. So I'll just end with that.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. And remember,
and again, it comes out of a place of love.
Tagua $10. I invited a certain Catholic. I'm not going to name the person to debate. They replied that they were blocked. That surprised me. He's always seemed to be in good faith. I'm familiar with the person you're talking about, and actually he has me blocked and I have him blocked. So the reality is that we blocked each other. I have no interest in interacting with that person. But I appreciate your super chat. Daniel, $1. What's the first principle of orthodoxy? What is this justification? I mean, that's what all the tag argumentation is. So we don't have time to go into rehearsing tag, but you can look up our previous discussions where we've actually done multiple podcasts on the notion of justification, Father Deacon Dr. Ananias and I. So you can go watch those. Guys, I want to remind you to head over to chalk.com. Use promo code J44Life, that's JAY44LIFE, to get 44% off. And I think I have it set now to where everybody will be dumped over into Cotel's live stream from this live stream. I finally figured out how to do that. So that should work. If it doesn't work, then be sure and hop on over to Cotel and support him. Get your copies of my books at the website. All the copies are signed. Jay's Analysis in the shop. You can subscribe to my
Lore Coffee.
Get Lore Coffee is linked in the show description as well. Let me give you those, guys. I think that's a excellent Orthodox-based bros that sell coffee. You can support Father Deacon and myself by using that referral code. Also, if you're interested in getting started with Bitcoin, I do have a referral code as well through Swan Bitcoin. It's a Bitcoin-only company, so you're going to cut out all the other gambling and whatever with the altcoins. If you're just interested in hodling, use the promo code right there for Swan Bitcoin to sign up, and just hodl Bitcoin is the safest method if that's what you want to do. If you're new to this topic, Yeah. Also, you can support me right
Also,
here.
don't forget
through Bitcoin
to sign up
for Montanica.
if you haven't purchased your tickets to Orthodox Montanica. Tickets are selling out. Um, the end of the month of this month. So what? In 7 days, the hotel discount code expires. So again, try, like, if you're thinking about coming, don't procrastinate. And we'll have lots of vendors. I wanted to give a shout out to St. Herman's Gallery is going to be one of the vendors. This is one of the engravings that they're going to be selling. We have some other people who are selling icons. They're going to build icon stands, multiple vendors. Like I said, some famous people are unannounced that are going to come. And so we still have room, but don't wait too long. You can purchase your tickets there. And again, we have a professional videographer, and with your tickets, not only do you get access to all the events, all the meals, the banquet dinner, but you also get the famous swag bags by our new sponsor. That's one of our sponsors is for this year is Distinctly Montana. And they have their magazine. You get magazines, Orthodox Montanica book, swag bag, and notebook, pen, and much more with that. Plus, record the recordings of the event, and as well as access to the live professional bluegrass band. So thank you, Jay. Thank you, everybody. Christ has risen.
Indeed he is. A reminder, again, this is my wallet. If you want to support via Bitcoin, you can use that QR code. It's also in the show description. And head on over to Coattail Stream. I will be on tonight. I've got 2 more podcasts to do today. I'll be on with us, my comedy buddies over at History Homos, their funny podcast, Scott Lizard, Abrams. And then tonight I'll be on Boiler Room, so you can spend the whole day with me if you'd like. And I can annoy you into oblivion throughout the rest of the day. Thank you, Father Deacon, for joining us, and thank you.